Bisexual Royals and Nobles from History. Thank you to Lilo for sponsoring this video. Bi and pansexuality have long been erased from history, but there have always been people who were attracted to both or all genders. In the past, the homosexual relationships of historic figures were often ignored or even covered up. Now, historians are more open to reconsidering people from the past as gay or lesbian, but these individuals' genuine romantic connections with members of the opposite sex are conversely overlooked. Today, let's meet 6 royals and nobles who, if they were alive today, would likely consider themselves bi or pansexual, and 2 recent royals who came right out and said it with pride. Alexander the Great greatly impressed his father, King Philip II of Macedonia, with his strategic intelligence and bravery. The prince was educated by the great philosopher Aristotle. He developed a strong, intimate friendship with fellow student Hephaestion. The young men were inseparable. Hephaestion rode into battle at Alexander's side. When King Philip rode off to war with Byzantium, he left his 16-year-old son in charge. A group of tribes rose up in rebellion, but the teenage prince drove them out of their territory, repopulated the area with Greeks, and renamed it Alexandropolis. Philip was so impressed that although he had other sons, Alexander inherited the throne at the age of 20, when his father was assassinated. Suspicious that his sire's killers would come for him, Alexander put to death a number of courtiers, including a few relatives. Recently conquered states, including Athens, suspected the young king might be weaker than his father and rose up in rebellion. But they were mistaken and were quickly suppressed. Alexander fell in love with Princess Roxana of Bactria and married her. They had 1 child together, Alexander. The king continued his relationship with Hephaestion, whom he named commander of the cavalry, second only to the king himself. Their relationship was considered unusual by Greeks, not because they were both men. That was perfectly acceptable, but because they were the same age. Conventional homosexual relationships at the time were strictly between older and younger men. Alexander and Hephaestion once made a pilgrimage to Troy, where together they laid flowers on the tomb of Achilles and Patroclus, famed gay lovers of antiquity. Once Alexander had secured control over all of Greece, he turned his view east to Asia. With his superior military might and strategy, he conquered the Persian Empire. In order to unite the Greeks and Persians, he took 2 Persian princesses, Stateria and Perisatus, as his second and third wives. One of the defeated Persian leaders offered the king the gift of a remarkably beautiful eunuch by the name of Bagoas. Alexander immediately took the young man as his lover and frequently embraced him in public. This relationship was more comfortable for the Greeks. When Bagoas sat next to Alexander at feasts, the army cheered the couple and demanded that they kiss, which they did enthusiastically. One courtier did call Bagoas the king's whore, but Bagoas used his influence to have the man's life destroyed. Alexander continued to march his army through the Middle East, Egypt, and Asia, conquering and destroying as he went. He often renamed cities in his own honor, which is why the area is littered with Alexandrias and Alexandropolises. Alexander next turned his sights on the Indian subcontinent, where his army dominated. He amassed a larger empire than any ruler before. By this time, he hadn't been back to Macedonia in many years, but he continued to demand military reinforcements from Greece. The army had grown tired of constant bloodshed and marching ever further from home. They wanted to return to Greece and began to mutiny. The king had little choice but to turn around and march home. But he took the long route and continued to beat new lands into submission along the way. En route, his longtime love, Hephaestion, died of fever. The king was devastated and laid on his friend's corpse for hours. He ordered divine funeral rites and commanded that all of his subjects mourn. Alexander drowned his sorrows in drink, and at the age of 32, at the height of his power, he died, either from binge drinking or from drinking wine poisoned by one of his countless enemies. Alexander the Great's tomb in Egypt became a popular tourist spot and was frequently damaged, so he was moved to a secret location. His final resting place is one of history's greatest mysteries. Whomever you like to spend your intimate time with, or if you just want to be alone, you can maximize your enjoyment with Lilo. Lilo leads the market in luxury, design, innovation, technology, and reputation. Their products are fully waterproof, easy to clean, made from medical-grade silicone, and come with a 10-year quality guarantee. Plus, their sleek, unique designs are just too cool for YouTube to handle. Hot tip, I highly recommend the Tiani 3, a great remote control device for couples. Sense motion technology allows you to increase intensity with the flick of a wrist. You and your partner are sure to love it, inside and out. Lilo's many phenomenal options are sure to put a sly, contented smile on everyone's face. And Lilo is not just a pleasure brand, it's a self-care movement aimed at those who know that pleasure transcends gender, age, race, and orientation. Click my link below and use code Lindsay10 to get 10% off Lilo products. This can be combined with other seasonal offers. And now, back to history. Hortense Mancini, Duchess of Mazarin, was born in Italy. She and her 4 sisters, all renowned beauties, were collectively called the Mazarinettes. They moved to the court of Louis XIV at Versailles in the hopes of securing advantageous marriages. Several of the sisters became lovers to the king and other important royals and nobles. Hortense received a proposal from the exiled son of beheaded King Charles I of England. However, her uncle, Cardinal Mazarin, refused Prince Charles's offer, as he did not believe the young man had good prospects. He regretted this decision when the English monarchy was restored and the young man was crowned King Charles II. He offered a sizable dowry, but the newly minted king declined to make Hortense his queen. 15-year-old Hortense was instead wed to Ormond Charles de la Meilleraye, one of the richest men in Europe. But the couple were miserable together. Hortense was bright and social, while Armand was miserly, jealous, and mentally unstable. He was oddly uptight about sex. He had all the private parts chipped off of his statues and blotted out of his paintings, and even had his female servants' front teeth knocked out, so they would be unable to attract male attention. Armand was so intensely jealous of his wife's dalliances with other men and women that he locked her up in a convent. She was able to escape with the help of her brother. She used her ample charms to her advantage to commence affairs with both King Louis XIV, who granted her an allowance, and the Duke of Savoy, who set her up in a house in the French Alps. There she held salons for authors, philosophers, and artists. But when the Duke died, his widow turned Hortense out, and her husband seized her allowance from the king. With no income or support, she was persuaded by the English ambassador to travel to London and seduce her former paramour, King Charles II. Around this time, she began dressing as a man. Hortense's dark beauty and sleek sophistication won the English king's infatuation. She displaced his mistress, Louise de Querouaille, who became extremely jealous. But Hortense's promiscuity ironically cooled the desires of one of the horniest kings in history. She was dubbed the Italian whore by the English. Hortense's worst offense was an affair with Charles's own illegitimate daughter, 17-year-old Anne, Countess of Sussex. The lesbian lovers had a fencing match in St. James Park, wearing only their nightgowns, and were ogled by the public. Anne's husband sent her to a convent, where she pined for Hortense, lying in bed all day and kissing a miniature of her beloved. King Charles dismissed Hortense, but they remained friends. She was set up with a country house and a pension, and was one of the first women to publish her own memoirs. Hortense also had an affair with author and playwright Ivar, who wrote of her, "Most illustrious princess, how infinite one of your own sex adored you, and that, among all the numerous conquests, your grace had not subdued a more entire slave, I assure you." Hortense died at the age of 53. Her insanely jealous husband, Armand, was finally able to control her in death. He purchased her body from her creditors and carted her around France with him. She was eventually buried in the Mazarin family tomb. Philippe I, Duc d'Orléans, was the second son of King Louis XIII of France. During his childhood, his mother called him "my little girl" and allowed him to dress in feminine clothes. While emasculating the spare was an effective way to make him less of a threat to the heir, this seems to have been Philippe's natural inclination anyway. As an adult, he often attended masquerades dressed as a woman. He was renowned as an excellent dancer. He was also an excellent military commander and covered himself in glory several times. Philippe's effeminate manner and male lovers were condoned by his big brother, Louis XIV. Their father's younger brother had rebelled after eloping with a foreign princess. But Louis didn't have to worry about his brother doing the same, as marriage would never be on the table for any of his love interests. And he had many. Like his famous brother, the Sun King, Philippe had a grand appetite for romance and sex. He did have female mistresses, but generally preferred young handsome men, so about a 4 or 5 on the Kinsey scale. At 18, the prince had an affair with 17-year-old Philippe Jules Mancini, brother of the aforementioned Hortense Mancini, who is said to be the first to introduce the prince to the Italian vice, contemporary slang for gay sex. The pair had a close relationship for the rest of their lives. At 21, Philippe married his first cousin, Princess Henrietta of England, who was in exile with her brother, Prince Charles. The marriage was not happy. Philippe told Henriette that he could not love her without the permission of his most significant paramour, Philippe de Lorraine. The threesome lived together uncomfortably at the Palais Royal. Henriette had 3 children, but it was rumored that King Louis had fathered them. Both Philippe and Henriette slept with legendary playboy Armand de Guermantes, who was notoriously narcissistic. But being the most attractive man at court, his many lovers overlooked this. Armand also seduced the king's mistress, Louise de la Vallière. He was banished from court when he and Henrietta hatched a jealous plot to drive a wedge between Louise and the king. Henrietta in turn begged the king to banish Philippe's lover. Louis obliged, but within months, Lorraine was back by the prince's side. Henrietta died suddenly at the age of 26. It was rumored that Lorraine had poisoned her. However, an autopsy revealed that she succumbed to gastroenteritis. Several princesses were approached about becoming Philippe's second wife, but after the treatment Henrietta had endured, most declined. Eventually, German Princess Elizabeth Charlotte accepted. She had plain looks and a full figure, and Philippe remarked, "How will I ever be able to sleep with her?" She confided in a friend that the prince needed to hang a rosary around his private parts in order to perform with her in bed. Despite her husband's habit of stealing her clothes and jewelry, the couple ended up having a rather agreeable marriage. Unlike his first wife's jealous intrigues, Elizabeth was candid and not vain. She tolerated her husband's lovers and was happy to move out of their bed after the birth of a 3rd child. She told one of his paramours, "You are welcome to gobble the peas. I don't like them." Philippe was the founder of the House of Orléans and made wise investments with his inheritance, thus securing the wealth of his descendants for generations. His private art collection grew to be one of the most important in the world. His 5 surviving children made advantageous political marriages, and most Catholic royals from that point on could trace their lineage back to him. Thus, this bisexual prince became the grandfather of Europe. Anne, Queen of Great Britain, was the second daughter of James II, the younger brother of King Charles II. At 6, she formed a close relationship with her playmate, Sarah Jennings. At 18, she married Prince George of Denmark. The couple had a devoted relationship. They bonded over their shared heartbreak. Anne had 17 pregnancies, though nearly all ended in miscarriage or stillbirth. 4 of her children were born alive, but died in infancy. Anne's father, James II, was forced off the throne in 1688 because of his Catholic faith. Parliament offered the throne to his eldest daughter, Mary, who was Protestant, and her husband, William of Orange, was crowned as her co-monarch. William was interested in men, and the pair didn't have any children. Mary died in 1694 and William in 1702, leaving the throne to 37-year-old Anne. She was the first married queen to rule England on her own. Her husband George was laid back and supportive of her. He blew off criticism that he ought to be trying to seize her power. In 1707, Parliament passed the Act of Union, which made England and Scotland a single state called Great Britain. As several kings before her had male favorites, Anne had female favorites. The most significant was her childhood friend, Sarah Jennings, now married and called Sarah Churchill. She was an ancestor of the World War II Prime Minister Winston Churchill. Sarah's husband was a top military commander, and her close relationship with the Queen made her the second most powerful woman in England. Sarah was beautiful and charming, while Anne was plain, shy, and often sick. Her many pregnancies had ruined her health. Sarah often used her influence to her advantage and wasn't afraid to disagree with the Queen. The couple were politically opposed. Sarah supported the progressive Whigs, and Queen Anne the religious and conservative Tories. Anne grew tired of Sarah's political lectures and attempts to influence policy, particularly in prolonging war on the continent led by her husband. Eventually, Anne transferred her affections to another lady-in-waiting, Abigail Marsham, who was young, demure, and quite the opposite of Sarah. This triangle is portrayed in the film The Favourite. Anne had only one living child, her great hope for the future, Prince William. But at the age of 11, he died of smallpox, exacerbated by inbreeding-related conditions. With no clear heir to the throne, Parliament passed the Act of Settlement, which laid down the rules of succession by which the British line of monarchs is still decided today. Anne's next Protestant relative was Sophia of Hanover, who, despite being in her 80s, was determined to outlive sickly 49-year-old Anne. She almost made it, but a letter from Anne accusing her of plotting to take the throne so shocked her that she died 2 months before Anne. Queen Anne died in 1714 and was buried next to her husband, George, and her children in Westminster Abbey. The crown went to Sophie's son, George I. Grand Duke Konstantin Konstantinovich of Russia was a grandson of Tsar Nikolai I. Grand Dukes were brought up in the military, but Constantine found the Navy boring. He was a talented pianist and artist, and published several poems and plays under the pen name K.R. And he translated famous works, including Hamlet, into Russian. He used his family funds to patronize other artists he admired, including his close friend Pyotr Tchaikovsky of Swan Lake and Nutcracker fame. At 27, Constantine had a love match with Princess Elisaveta of Saxe-Altenburg, his maternal second cousin. They had 9 children over 20 years. Constantine was a doting husband and father. He was one of the few Romanovs who was close with his cousin, Tsar Nikolai II, and his wife, Empress Alexandra. The relatives bonded over their shared devotion to family, while many of the other Grand Dukes were notorious playboys. The happy family made their home at Pavlovsk Palace and frequented imperial balls. In 1914, Constantine and Elizabeth were vacationing at a spa town in Germany when World War I broke out. Behind enemy lines, they were frantic to return home, but were detained as political prisoners. The Tsar managed to secure their release, but the middle-aged couple had to make their way across the front lines on foot. The war was cruel to the family. 5 of their sons served in the army, and one, Prince Oleg, as well as their son-in-law, were killed in action. These blows to Konstantine's spirit deteriorated his health, and he died in 1915 at the age of 56. 3 years later, the Russian monarchy was abolished, and the Romanov family were targeted by Bolsheviks. 3 of Konstantine's sons, John, Konstantin, and Igor, were executed. In 1920, their bodies were recovered from an abandoned mine shaft and reburied in the Church of Martyrs near Beijing, China. Grand Duchess Elizabeth and 4 of their children were able to escape Russia. Decades after Constantine's death, his strikingly candid diaries were published, and the world learned that the devoted husband and father of 9 children had been tormented by homosexual desires. His first experience with a man occurred during his youth in the Imperial Guard, after which he made great efforts to suppress his feelings. But despite his love for his wife, he could not resist what he called his main sin. After the birth of their 7th child, he became a regular patron at St. Petersburg's male brothels and bathhouses. In 1904, he had an affair with a young man named Yatsko. He wrote of their long talks of shared experiences, of becoming infatuated with men. Before leaving, he kissed my face and hands. I should not have allowed this. However, I was punished afterwards by vague feelings of shame and remorse. In his later years, Constantine wrote less of his homosexual urges, perhaps because of aging or having come to terms with his conscience. Prince George, Duke of Kent, was the 4th son of King George V of the UK and Queen Mary of Teck. He was the most intelligent and attractive of his siblings, and the black sheep of the family. He played piano, spoke French and Italian fluently, and had a strong artistic streak. He followed his elder brothers to preparatory school and naval college. By the time he came of age, World War I was over, but he served as a naval officer in the 1920s and earned his pilot's license. In 1931, he accompanied his brother David on a tour of South America. Despite their 8-year age gap, the brothers were cut from the same dapper, gin-soaked cloth and were very close. They often hit the town together. George had affairs with musical star Jessie Matthews, writer Cecil Roberts, cabaret star Florence Mills, socialites Poppy Baring and Ethel Wiggum, and novelist Barbara Cartland. He had a 19-year relationship with playwright Noel Coward. The pair once walked through the streets of London in drag and were arrested on suspicion of prostitution. In 1932, George married his cousin, Princess Mariana of Greece and Denmark, granddaughter of both King George I of Greece and Tsar Alexander II of Russia. The couple got on incredibly well. He liked her independent spirit and the fact that she didn't complain when he drove his sports car too fast. The attractive and chic prince and princess were the toast of London and surrounded themselves with artists and interesting people. George's family hoped marriage might settle him down, but instead he partied harder. He had an ongoing ménage à trois with Jorge Ferreira, son of the Argentinian ambassador, and American heiress Kiki Preston. Kiki was known in upper-class circles as the girl with the silver syringe. She introduced George to cocaine, morphine, and other drugs. Prince David got his brother off the hard narcotics, and later wrote that he believed George had fathered several illegitimate children, including a son by Kiki, Michael Canfield, who was adopted by an American couple and went on to marry Caroline Lee Bouvier, Jackie Kennedy's little sister. When George V died, Prince George and his 3 surviving brothers stood around their father's coffin, creating a ceremony known as the Vigil of the Princes, which has been repeated for several royals since. When David became King Edward VIII, George was appointed his aide-de-camp, but Edward abdicated in 11 months to marry his mistress. The next brother, Bertie, chose the regnal name George VI to promote continuity with his popular father and create family naming confusion. Prince George was King George's aide-de-camp. At the outbreak of World War II, the prince returned to active service as a rear admiral in the Royal Air Force. He was kept out of harm's way, but worked to boost morale. In 1942, Prince George and 14 others took off in an RAF flying boat from Scotland headed to Iceland. The plane crashed on a rock off the coast, and all but one aboard were killed. George was 39. The papers relating to the mission mysteriously vanished, leading to several conspiracy theories, including that the prince was on a secret mission to Sweden to negotiate peace with the Nazis, and that he was intentionally murdered by the British government because he was a Nazi sympathizer. He was buried near Queen Victoria's mausoleum at Frogmore. Prince George was the first British royal in 450 years to be killed in the line of action. His 6-year-old son, Edward, succeeded him as Duke of Kent. Prince Aegon von Fürstenberg was born in Switzerland and raised in Italy. Though his father's princely family no longer ruled their ancestral German homeland, he grew up in immense wealth and privilege. While attending the University of Geneva, Aegon fell in love with fellow student Diane Halfen. She was Belgian of Romanian Greek descent and the daughter of a Holocaust survivor. They wed in France in 1969. Diane was already pregnant with the first of their 2 children. Aegon's father, Prince Tassilo, did not approve of his son marrying a Jew and refused to attend the reception. The young couple moved to New York City. These chic Europeans became a mainstay of the social scene and frequently partied with rock stars and movie stars at Studio 54. Both had strong interests in fashion and interior design. Aegon began his career as a buyer for Macy's and took night classes at the Fashion Institute of Technology and Parsons School of Design. But he could see that his wife was the greater talent. He encouraged her to open her own fashion house, and her wrap dress became a staple for every chic woman in the 70s. Aegon created his own successful fashion and fragrance lines for men and women. He also wrote 2 top-selling books, The Power Look and The Power Look at Home, Decorating for Men. In 1973, Aegon was interviewed by New York Magazine. He spoke candidly about his own bisexuality, relationships with men, and his open marriage with Diane. He disclosed that she had experimented with another woman, but didn't enjoy it. As wild and open as the 70s were, Diane was deeply hurt by her husband publicly airing their private laundry. They separated soon after the article was published and divorced in 1983. The same year, Aegon married florist Lynn Marshall from Mississippi. They never had children. The prince contracted hepatitis C in the 1970s. The infection eventually caused liver cancer, from which he died in Rome in 2004 at the age of 57. Lord Ivar Mountbatten is a great-great-great-grandson of Queen Victoria, 3rd cousin to Queen Elizabeth II, and 1st cousin to Prince Philippe. He knew from a young age that he was bisexual. He attended private boarding school in England and college in Vermont in the U.S. At 31, he married Penelope Ann Vere Thomas, and the couple had 3 daughters, Ella, Alexandra, and Louise. Ivar stated about his marriage, "Penny was aware before we got married that my attraction went both ways. She was understanding, and I will always be grateful to her. Ivar is particularly close to the Queen's youngest son, Prince Edward, and is the godfather of his daughter, Lady Louise." Ivar and Penelope divorced amicably after 17 years of marriage. In 2016, Ivar made public that he was in a relationship with flight attendant James Coyle, whom he'd met at a ski resort. In 2018, the couple were married at Brideswell Park. Ivar was escorted down the aisle by his ex-wife. The newlyweds were toasted with Paul Roger, Churchill's favorite champagne, and opted for a tiered collection of cheeses rather than a wedding cake. In 2024, Ivar appeared on and won reality competition show The Traitors. He is the first member of the British royal family to come out publicly as queer, and to have a same-sex marriage. Want even more tea on history? Check out the History Tea Time podcast. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, comment your thoughts, and check out my other history videos. You can also join my Patreon to support my work and get early access to all of my multi-part series. Thank you for watching.